My presentation is mainly going to focus on my trip to France. That was a very interesting experience, and it really opened my eyes a lot about the state of the comic industry and what we can do and what opportunities we can take as creatives. The Focus BD and Webtoon comic program was a product of Creation Africa, and it was also organized by the Institut France, and it took place between October 21st to the 27th. So we were traveling across France and visiting a lot of animation schools, a lot of exhibitions, and we were basically learning about the comic industry, not only in France but globally, and the comic industry between different Africans who took part in the program. So for the program, we were basically 15 artists across Africa. And it was a very interesting experience because some of us were English speakers and a good majority of the people there were French. So the language barrier was an interesting thing to navigate. It taught me that I really need to learn French because Francophone countries have a more robust industry when it comes to comic, and this is mainly because France and Belgium have a very big market for comics, either beginners or veterans. So something to consider as well, that if you're trying to practice comics, you might have to learn a bit of French. So the main purpose of the event was to strengthen the comic industry in Francophone and obviously Anglophone countries, which is obviously East African countries, and to create like understanding to encourage cultural and economic evolution in the comic industry. Okay. So the key activities, so for the first day we landed, we had a couple of sessions in Paris where we were basically connecting with the various artists from across Africa, understanding our different activities and what we have to offer. And then we took a train to a city called Angoulême, which was by far my favorite city in Paris right now, because it's basically like a hub for creative. Like everywhere is full of graffiti, beautiful art, comic books, like a lot of a very creative city, very many animation studios, very many comic studios, amazing programs. And also Angoulême has the third biggest comic festival in the world, which is pretty dope for us to have been there and to connect with the various partners in the field. The second day of the program, we were still in Angoulême doing a lot of discussions to try and understand what is the state of comics. So a lot of people from the French-speaking countries were speaking in different panels about the experience. And one of the most interesting thing that I took from the whole sessions was everyone is complaining about money. You think because you're in Kenya, someone in Europe is probably having a very easy time creating art, but it's not the case. They also have challenges when it comes to funding, when it comes to publishing. But considering how few resources we have, I think we're doing a pretty decent job, in my opinion. So during our session in Angoulême, we got to also visit one of the premium museums called the City Museum, which also has a library. I bought a lot of books. I'm currently very broke because of it. And it was a very interesting experience because there was a Marvel and X-Men exhibition together with a lot of exhibition from various French comics. And I can't include everything. It was just too much. I cannot include everything because I want to focus on the main things that I got from the whole experience. After this, we went back to Paris for another amazing exhibition at the Center Bordeaux. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but basically the exhibition was stages of comics throughout the centuries. So we got to see like how the comic industry began and why it is, because it was literally a curated exhibition, because there's a new movement to see comics and comic artists as professional artists, because it takes a lot of time to create some of these panels. As you can see from the choices I chose, like the line work of the last one is just ridiculous. Like, imagine how long that must have took for the artist to create that. And after that, we went back to a different country. So we went to Sao Malo, for the I'm gonna butcher this, but for another festival, for another comic festival, and there we were part of an African delegation that was part of the festival. We got to discuss about our challenges and how we can collaborate and connect with publishers in French-speaking countries, as well as what we could do to better position ourselves as African creatives when it comes to the comic industry, because it's very big. It's ridiculously big, considering what we're doing anyway. So some of the findings I got from the whole experience is that while the African comic industry is building, we still need, there's a lot of work to be done, especially with regards to distribution, because most of the panels, when it came to speaking about creating content for Africa, the biggest hurdle was distribution. They don't know any publishers on the ground. They don't know any logistics of how they can get either their books, when it comes to Marvel, or your books, if you're a local publisher or creative, to the people. They don't understand. They don't have any data. We don't have any data as a continent about the success of comics, and that is hindering basically the industry. The next finding from the program was the availability of digital platforms like Vortex and Zebra Comics, who are among the people who are part of the delegation, is very promising, because webcomics basically reduce the barrier of entry for a lot of comic creatives, because publishing is very expensive if you know anything about publishing and you're trying to start without any funding. So though webcomics is a very promising sector in the continent, the biggest challenge comes with regards to payment systems. So someone in Gabon cannot buy a comic from Zebra Comics when they're in Congo because of legislative work. So someone was even saying we should have a euro for Africa, so that we can make it easier for payment system to change across borders. Another finding from the program was some of the biggest markets, obviously South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. And though they're very big, there's still a lack when it comes to sufficient legislation and support for comic authors. Because one of the things I noticed the most during the whole program is the artists in France are very supported by legislation, supported by funding. There's literally a whole city dedicated to comics, literally just a whole city. So you can imagine they have so much space to grow. So because we're a beginning industry, I think as the industry players, this is a very big challenge for us to start considering like engaging people in legislative positions, to maybe start and consider creating laws that will better protect us and our industry. Another finding I found is like the language barrier between Francophone and English-speaking countries is very big. Joel was just speaking about the fact that we're neighbors with Congo-Brazzaville, we're neighbors with Rwanda, but we have no way to exchange ideas other than music because of the language barrier. And it might be good to start considering maybe having translators for various famous comics in different countries, so that we can encourage that cultural intermingling as a continent, because we are a very big market, and there's no point for manga and anime and other comic industry to be so big in our continent, and yet we have creatives here who are not making a living. So after all that depression, what are the solutions that we discussed? So basically, one of the solutions we discussed with some of the artists, like the CEO of Vortex Corp, was to create a database for publishers, like an online database. So let's say like East African communities, we have an online database of all the publishers that create comic books. We have an online database for stores that have that supply comic books. So when you're creating your indie comic and maybe you don't have any support, you know where to start, you know who to start emailing. So that's one of the things we're supposed to work on as the delegates. Another thing was to establish a union as creatives. It might be a little bit harder than everything else, because a union would help us in terms of regulating the amount of pay we get. Because in France, I think, and also in Japan, they have like a standard budget of what they expect from the creative projects. But here we're just winging it. An NGO can approach you to create a comic and you're just winging it. So creating some of the structures so that we ensure that comic creatives are actually making money from their craft, because comics is it's a lot of time-consuming work, so you should at least be paid. The next solution was to develop educational content, to help beginner creatives in terms of securing funding, in terms of understanding IP, and in terms of just being able to leverage information from veterans to build the industry, because there are too many few people in the top, and we need an industry to grow from the bottom down so that we have a viable market in order for us to compete globally. Another thing was that we discussed was a need to promote cultural exchange between Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa. Right now, we're too segmented as a continent because of the language barrier, and it might be very beneficial for us to come together to create a bigger force when it comes to the comic book industry. So if you love a creative online and you see there's a language barrier, use Google Translate. Google Translate was my app of the week because I could not understand most French. And maybe consider picking up another language, which is very, very important for us to break that barrier of language. So, what are the important notes that I took from this whole program? So my focus is just going to be from the trip and not from the anthology, mainly because I don't want to speak here too long as well. So some of the notes I got is, if you want to be published in France, you need to be published by a French publisher. So basically you need to be published in French. That way your book can be circulated in French bookstores. Another thing I picked up on was, of course, Angoulême is a very, very big comic book festival. If there is a way, if you have a book right now and there's a way you can fund yourself in Angoulême, you would have it made, because it's a very big comic festival and a lot of people are very interested in new stories and African stories, because there's not enough coverage of African stories. So if there's a way you can find yourself in Angoulême, whether it's like working together as a group and buying a booth or attending the festival online, you would have it made, basically. The next is focus on projects you're passionate about. Because when it comes to comic books, you might not make any money from it. That is a very real possibility. But if you focus on things you're passionate about, it might generate something. One of the creatives that I met was Akoswa from Accra, Ghana. She's the creator of Moon Girls. I don't know if any of you know of her work. Really amazing work. And basically her comic book is being made into an animation, a 3D animation, like Gift was saying, the transition between comic books and animation. She literally did something she was very, very passionate about, that's about feminism and the queer experience, and of course, Ghana mythology. And now she has this really big, beautiful body of work that is being created to something else with grassroots IP. Another thing that I learned that I think you can pick on, if you have any creative project, whether you're finished creating it or it's in the work, I want you to start looking at festivals, global festivals that you can submit your work. Because some of these festivals where you're going to get an agent, that's where you're going to get a publisher. If you're an indie creative, that's where you're going to get a lot of important eyes on your work. So you might not be able to attend them physically, but submit your work. Some of these festivals have funding to bring creatives into their space. Okay, so yeah, start researching on festivals. Another note is, if you're interested in creating comics, whether it's for social change or a particular kind of initiative, if there are any NGOs that you want to work on, start DMing these people either on LinkedIn, on Instagram. If you want to work with Greenpeace, if you're very passionate about climate change, reach out to them. Because basically there was an artist from Quebec. That's literally what she did. She wrote a tiny comic about climate change and water and the ocean pollution, and she was able, through that tiny comic, to work with Greenpeace. And obviously she got really well paid, and she was one of the panelists at Angoulême. So start from somewhere. Don't wait for the door to open. Try and knock at the door yourself. And if you're a web creator, you need to have your comic printed, unfortunately. People prefer a physical copy to the web, as big as the web is. The most established, in quotes, the most established festivals prefer like a physical copy. So if you can get like 2 or 3 copies of your web series printed, so that when you're going to events, you can actually hand people something tactable, that would be your best bet, because some people are not willing to share the information, they're not willing to give you the email or their phone number, but they're more receptive to a physical comic. Another thing is, if you are interested in creating, I think I repeated that, sorry. So the last thing is, consider co-creation, because creating comics can be very expensive and time-consuming, but you can collaborate to create a body of work. That is the beauty of the anthology. It is a book that is a compilation of a collaborative work. Yeah. So if you cannot create a full comic by yourself, it might be reasonable for you to consider co-creation, because one of the delegates was Njoka from Cameroon, and he's the owner of Zebra Comics. And what he did is basically collaborate with 8 creatives in Cameroon, search for funding, and created this amazing platform that has so many titles, one of the biggest titles apparently, of African comics. So if you cannot do it yourself, try to consider looking for partners to work with. These are just additional notes of things you can, organization you can research that might be of interest. City is basically a comic strip museum. It has a permanent and temporary exhibition in Angoulême that specializes in comic books, a store, library, and cinema. It is an amazing space, very beautiful work, very, very vibrant comic industry there, and a lot of support for creatives. So Google them. If you're looking for funding, they have open calls. Another organization to keep in mind in your career is the Web Academy in Angoulême. So the Web Academy in Angoulême is literally a new initiative, and it is a free 13-week training course that is open to all French-speaking web comics. So the only caveat is you have to speak French, but it's open to everyone, and they do offer sponsorships. So we met a couple of Cameroonians there who was being sponsored the whole 13 weeks there to create comic books that were then going to be published on Ono, which is a webtoon publisher. Something else to consider. Another amazing organization is the MCA, which is a technical and artistic development schools for animation and for the animation industry, but mostly for film. So they take you through the pipeline between production, marketing, like everything to do with animation, not just the technical aspect like other schools, but everything, the whole production. And they also have sponsorships and scholarships. But the scholarship, you have to go directly to them to see it. Another important organizations that I saw from the program was the City. That word that I shall not say because I will butcher it. So the City, unfortunately, is going to be closed very soon for the next 5 years, but they will be relocating to a smaller space. But it's the National Museum for Modern and Contemporary Art in Paris, and they obviously have open calls, and they have a very beautiful library that has some of the biggest collections of comic books. We tried to engage them about having a collection of African comics, and basically the answer was, we don't have a big enough catalog. So this is literally a call to action for all of you guys to start creating the work, because there's literally a market there waiting for the comic book, for the finished product to be there. And last but not least, the Institut Français, which was the main facilitator of the program, and just generally amazing people who have facilitated so many creatives that I was able to connect with during the program. So unfortunately, that is the end of my very long-winded presentation. And if you have any more questions, I'm going to be around. And yeah, it was a very amazing experience. I'm very motivated to work. And please Google all of those organizations to see some of the exhibitions on display. Just amazing work. Yes, and that's me.